Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News, an Indian perspective on All India Radio. This is Navneet Singh and with me is Abhineet Shukla, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring to you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserts country's G20 presidency belongs to the entire nation and is a unique opportunity to showcase its strengths. Human Rights Day observed on Saturday. India's President Draupadi Murmu says developing sensitivity and sympathy key to promoting human rights. New Delhi abstains from voting on UNSC resolution on exempting humanitarian aid from sanctions. India's largest business jet terminal commissioned at Cochin International Airport. In FIFA World Cup at Qatar, Morocco enter semi-finals defeating Portugal 1-0. England to face France in remaining last 8 match later on Saturday. And in cricket, India wins third ODI against Bangladesh by 227 runs at Chittagong. We start the world news with our segment G20 in India. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that country's G20 presidency belongs to the entire nation and is a unique opportunity to showcase the country's strengths. The Prime Minister said this while chairing a video meeting of the governors, chief ministers of states and lieutenant governors of union territories to discuss aspects related to India's G20 presidency. India took over the year-long presidency of G20 on the 1st of this month and will convene the G20 Leaders Summit for the first time in the country next year. Speaking at the meeting, Mr. Modi emphasized the importance of teamwork and sought the cooperation of the states and union territories in the organization of various G20 events. Mr. Modi pointed out that the G20 presidency will help showcase parts of India beyond the conventional big metros and bring out the uniqueness of each part of the country. A number of governors, chief ministers and lieutenant governors shared their thoughts during the meeting, emphasizing the preparations being done by the states to suitably host G20 meetings. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar also addressed the meeting and a presentation was made by country's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant. The first set of discussions under the Sherpa track of the G20 summit concluded earlier this week in the Indian lake city of Udaipur in Rajasthan. With it, India has set the stage for its year-long G20 presidency with flavor, fervor and a clear-cut agenda that discernibly gravitates towards the focus areas of emerging economies. Through G20's presidency, the country will work to promote the universal sense of oneness with the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. Let's listen to the highlights of the first Sherpa meeting.
भारत G20 की अध्यक्षता करेगा। भारत की सबसे बड़ी विशेषता अतिथि देवो भव की है। यानी अतिथि देवो भव ये भावना जो है ये हर भारतीय के रगों में है। अपनत्व का ये भाव प्रकट होता है।
India took over the presidency of the G20 on 1st December 2022. The first Sherpa meeting of India's G20 presidency was held over 4 days in Udaipur, Rajasthan from 4th of December to 7th of December 2022. After 3 days of extensive deliberations and a day's excursion to the historic Kumbhalgarh Fort and Ranakpur Temple, the meeting of India's G20 presidency came to a successful conclusion on December 7th. The meeting saw full and active participation by the G20 members, 9 guest countries and 14 international organizations. Let me give you the highlights of this 4-day-long Sherpa meeting. The first day of the meeting saw various activities, interactions and events. These included an informal media interaction, a side event on accelerating the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, an exhibit on Jal Sanji art, a networking event for delegates, and a dessert music symphony. The second day began with the discussions on key focus areas of India's G20 presidency. The first two sessions were on technological transformation and green development and lifestyle for environment, that is life, respectively. These were followed by a dialogue on global and regional economy, prospects and challenges. An informal session over high tea or Chai Pe Charcha was also held among the G20 Sherpas in the evening. Important conversations on key global issues of inclusive growth, multilateralism, and women-led development were the highlights of the third day. Discussions were also held on tourism and culture and 3 F's, that is, food, fuel, and fertilizer. India's G20 Sherpa, Amitabh Kant, provided an overview of India's G20 priorities across 6 different working groups on agriculture, trade and investment, employment, anti-corruption, tourism, and culture. He emphasized the need for transformational efforts in the above areas. He also talked about the ways to strengthen cooperative efforts. During the 4 days of India's first Sherpa meeting, the delegates witnessed various aspects of the vibrant culture of Rajasthan. They also took a tour of the renowned crafts village Shilpgram, where they were thrilled to see the diversity of Rajasthani arts and crafts. Further, they enjoyed a musical treat at the historic Manik Chowk in Udaipur. The first Sherpa meeting was a blend of productive discussions on an action-oriented, decisive agenda and a unique cultural experience of many flavors of Rajasthan. This has set the tone for forthcoming meetings in 32 different G20 work streams, including the Sherpa track, finance track, and engagement groups. The warm hospitality extended by India with the motto Atithi Devo Bhavaha resonated throughout the G20 Sherpa meetings and was highly appreciated by all delegates.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said that India's G20 presidency is a matter of pride. He said that the G20 meetings will be held in 55 cities in the country and the holy city of India, Varanasi, is one of them. This was stated by Mr. Jaishankar while talking to the media on the sidelines of an event in Varanasi on Saturday. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on Mission Life, Lifestyle for Environment. In conversation is Ashish Chaturvedi, Head of the Environment, Energy and Resilience at UNDP India. Moderator is AIR correspondent Omvesh Upadhyay.
In the view of the danger lurking around the nature, ecosystem and environment, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on 20 October 2022 unveiled the action plan for Mission Life, Lifestyle for Environment, an India-led global mass movement that will nudge individuals and communities for action to protect and preserve the environment. To discuss on the Lifestyle for Environment, we have with us Shri Ashish Chaturvedi ji. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Ashish ji, in the very beginning, I would like to know what exactly is the Mission Life and how great a significance does it hold, keeping in mind the state of rapid climate change.
So Mission Life was essentially launched by the Prime Minister as early as COP26. Which happened in Glasgow. This was a COP before the one which just recently concluded in Egypt at Sharm el-Sheikh. However, the antecedents and the name, as you can say, or for Mission Life was actually enshrined in the Paris Agreement at the insistence of India in the sort of preamble of the Paris Agreement, which actually mentioned the propagation of sustainable lifestyles as a key element of keeping global warming to a manageable level. So within 1.5 degrees preferably, but definitely below 2 degrees. So Mission Life basically began as early as preamble of the Paris Agreement. As you mentioned in your remarks already, the Prime Minister launched it officially on 20th of October with the UN Secretary General, who was in Gujarat at the Statue of Unity at Kevadia, and I had the pleasure of being there in person as well. And I think this is where the global call for Mission Life was launched. And before that, in June this year on World Environment Day, the Prime Minister had actually launched a global call for ideas on Mission Life, which is going to conclude on 31st of December this year. So there is an entire program of activities which has led to the definition of this program called Mission Life. What it essentially contains is this idea of getting as much citizen participation as possible, because the Prime Minister has called for how individuals can actually drive climate action as well. It cannot be too distant from our individual choices. All our individual choices, from the kinds of things we eat, the way we move, the kind of clothes we wear, every individual consumption decision has an impact on the environment and also on the climate. And therefore, individual participation and the choices individuals make will have a significant impact on how the climate is affected. And this is essentially what is the crux behind the Mission Life.
When we talk about that Mission Life is set to follow the participative approach, could you please elaborate more about it? How does it include the citizens in front in the playing role?
India's had a tradition of living in harmony with nature. If you even look around you, and especially if you talk to people of sort of the generation of my mother or my grandmother, sort of they were living fairly well within the means, either because of choice, but also because of constraints which were imposed by availability of certain resources. So we've had a certain kind of tradition. Even the most affluent did not necessarily live at the expense of nature traditionally. However, over the last few sort of decades, we've seen that there is a certain class of people within this country, but also globally, who are definitely living much beyond the means of our natural carrying capacity of this planet, right? So by carrying capacity, I mean what the kind of resources which are available. And recent figures suggest that if everybody starts living that we need 2 Earths, resources of 2 Earths, to maintain the standards and the kind of quality of living that we have kind of gotten used to. So this is clearly not sustainable. And if this is not sustainable, then who are the sort of key actors who can drive this sustainable behavior? Of course, large corporations do have a significant role to play in terms of what kind of products they make. But similarly, individuals, consumers who are actually making that buying decision also have agency. So in order to give individuals the agency, the participatory power, it is good to kind of give a call for participation by all the consumers, individual consumers. And this is precisely what the Mission Life does. It gives a call, like a clarion call, to individuals from around the world to make strong, positive consumption choices, and to also get them to sort of acknowledge that their consumption decisions are actually going to have a significant impact on the sustainability of our planet. In order to make it more participatory, this is where the idea competition, which has been launched on World Environment Day in 2022, it's basically looking for how to enhance community participation, individual participation, by either giving them some incentives or by giving them nudges, or maybe on occasions through policy push as well.
I would like to state a fact here that India, if I'm not wrong, constitute around 17% of the world's population, but India's contribution to global carbon emissions is only 4%. Despite not being part of the problem in that big ways, our numerous global initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, India has taken the lead in presenting and building solutions for the world by bringing the global community together. So can we call our country a trendsetter who is continuously working towards the betterment of the environment, Ashish ji?
See, we can claim credit for a lot of things, but I think we have challenges as well, and I think both have to be acknowledge. So the list of things that you mentioned with the International Solar Alliance, CDRI, the OSO award, this One Sun, One World, One Grid, all of these are great initiatives and they need to be promoted and they need to be upscaled and they need to be brought to the global map. And I think India is already doing that under the G20 presidency. Of course, India is also going to push a lot of these agendas with its own priorities. But I think we also need to do more domestically. And although we are already on a good way in the recent ratings, the Climate Action Tracker ratings also mention India in the top 3 or 5. I don't remember exactly the number, but India is doing fairly well, but we can do more. And of course, we don't have to do more just to please the rest of the world. I think it is in our own interest to scale up some of these initiatives. And I think life is a great example. We have substantive portions of our own populations which are living quite unsustainably. And of course, that number in percentage terms might be small, but in absolute numbers, because of the size of our population, those numbers can actually get quite inflated as well. So I think we have to keep that at the back of our minds, that there is enough and more of a constituency within our own country, which should also be kind of pushing this agenda of sustainable lifestyles. And if you look around you, you know who these people are. In large cities, in sort of smaller towns, you can see really sort of wasteful consumption of different kinds. And also the new generation seems to be also adopting some of these behaviors, which I think can be moderated through the adoption of Mission Life. But having said that, I think I'm completely in alignment with the suggestion that, Mission Life is another one of these global initiatives. So I think we should think of it as a global initiative. It's not necessarily an India initiative. It's an initiative which is originated in our country, but it's a global initiative because the challenges that have been created in other parts of the world are actually a much bigger contributor to the global climate change. And in fact, Mission Life should really be pushed in those other parts of the world as well.
Our global movement. You mentioned briefly about India's G20 presidency and how India will likely give a thrust to lifestyle for environment thing. Could you please elaborate a bit on that as well?
Yeah, so I think as far as I know and to the best of our knowledge, life is going to be, lifestyles for environment is going to be a critical cross-cutting priority of the Indian G20 presidency. And I think it fits into several different agendas. Of course, it's about environment, climate, sustainability as a priority area, but it's also about agriculture. It's also about, because the kind of food we eat, the kind of energy choices, so it's definitely a part of the energy transition working group that is part of the G20. It's definitely a developmental priority because Mission Life would cut across different kinds of economic sectors, but also about social indicators, about the environmental indicators as well. So I think it's going to feature quite broadly in the agenda of India's G20 presidency. And I think it remains to be seen how it is received by different parts of the G20, well, different countries which are a part of the G20. But I believe that it has great potential for arriving at some kind of collective positioning on how we work with our populations who seem to believe that governments are not doing enough on climate change. So I think it's basically about getting citizen participation. It's also making citizens a critical actor on climate action and not only about sort of recipients. And I think it also has this transversal option, impact of creating citizenry which is demanding more change as well. So if citizens say that we are doing so much, adopting these lifestyles for environment, our government should also do much more as far as environment is concerned. So there's this feedback process which can be triggered by the adoption of this or spreading of this movement. And I think for all of these reasons, the push by the Indian presidency on life can have significant impacts across the G20 countries to begin with. But of course, because the G20 countries have 80% of global population, around 80-85% of the global GDP, of course, if it's adopted in the G20 and if it's supported by the G20, then it can be pushed in the rest of the world as well.
Thank you so much, Ashish ji, for joining us today and having this meaningful and deep conversation with All India Radio. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
This is All India Radio, giving you the world news.
Human Rights Day was observed on Saturday. The day is observed on the 10th of December every year to commemorate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is UDHR, which was adopted and proclaimed by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1948 as the shared standard yardstick to protect human rights across the globe. The theme of this year's celebration is Dignity, Freedom and Justice for All. Addressing the 74th Human Rights Day celebrations in New Delhi on Saturday, India's President Draupadi Murmu stressed the need for expanding the notion of justice among all. She said, developing sensitivity and sympathy is the key to promoting human rights. President Murmu said, if people can imagine themselves in the place of those who are treated as less than human, it would open their eyes and compel them to do the needful.
Today is the beginning of the worldwide year-long celebration of the 75 years of the UDHR. The United Nations has chosen dignity, freedom and justice for all as the theme of the year 2022. That is close to the ideals expressed in the preamble of our Constitution. What do we mean by justice? The preamble explains it is justice, social, economic and political.
President Murmu said, India is proud of the fact that its work related to human rights has been appreciated internationally. India has abstained from voting in United Nations Security Council, that is UNSC, on a resolution that exempts humanitarian aid efforts from sanctions. In the explanation of the vote, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, said that India's concerns were triggered by proven instances of terrorist groups in its neighborhood, including those listed by the Council, reincarnating themselves as humanitarian organizations and civil society groups precisely to evade the sanctions. She said, these terrorist organizations use the umbrella of the humanitarian assistance space to raise funds and recruit fighters. We have a report.
Making a veiled reference to Pakistan, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, said New Delhi will call for caution and due diligence to be used when providing humanitarian aid to groups that are prohibited under UN Security Council Resolution 1267, who continue to thrive with full state hospitality in territories universally acknowledged as terrorist havens by the international community. India reiterated during the negotiations that under no circumstances the garb of humanitarian cover intended to be provided by these exemptions should be misused by banned terrorist groups to expand their terror activities in the region and beyond. She said, more importantly, such exemptions must not facilitate mainstreaming of terror entities in the political space in the region. Ms. Kamboj said, due diligence and extreme caution in the implementation of this resolution, therefore, is an absolute must. She said, for this very reason, India had sought in the text of the resolution a proactive role for the 1267 monitoring team, coupled with robust reporting standards and mechanisms. Reshma Tiwari for World News.
The country's largest business jet terminal and the first chartered gateway were commissioned at the Cochin International Airport in Indian state of Kerala on Saturday evening. With this, Cochin Airport has become the fourth airport in India to operate a private jet terminal. The new facility at the airport will boost tourism as well as the meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibitions sector in the state. It will propel the airport to the forefront of the aviation industry in the country. The business jet terminal inaugurated on Saturday was built at a cost of 40 crore rupees by renovating the old domestic terminal. It covers an area of 40,000 square feet with comfortable lounges, customs and immigration counters, a business center and other modern facilities. International Monetary Fund Chief Kristalina Georgieva has called on China to speed up restructuring of Sri Lankan debt. In a statement released after the 7th 1+6 roundtable in China, Ms. Georgieva said that there is a need to accelerate and finalize the debt treatments for Sri Lanka, which would allow for disbursements from the IMF. China is a top lender to Sri Lanka along with Japan, the Asian Development Bank and India. Meanwhile, China has informed Sri Lanka that they will also hold bilateral discussions with the IMF and World Bank. Some of China's infrastructure loans have also been questioned for the lack of proper feasibility plans, including Lotus Tower, Hambantota Port and an airport which was largely remained unused.
In Bangladesh, all 7 MPs of the main opposition party BNP resigned from the parliament in a rally organized in Dhaka. During the rally, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, that is BNP, put forward a 10-point charter of demand against the Sheikh Hasina government. At the rally, BNP's International Affairs Secretary Rumeen Farhana announced that the resignations were sent on email and will be physically handed over to the Speaker on Sunday. A prominent football journalist from the United States has died while covering the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. 48-year-old Grant Wahl collapsed as extra time began in the Argentina-Netherlands game on Friday night. Early reports suggested that he may have had a heart attack, but this has yet to be officially confirmed. Last month, Mr. Wahl was briefly detained by Qatari authorities for trying to enter a stadium wearing a rainbow shirt in support of LGBT rights.
In football, Morocco defeated Portugal 1-0 on Saturday to become the first African country to enter the semi-finals of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. Morocco's Youssouf Al-Nassiri scored lone goal of the match in 42nd minute. In the fourth and the last quarter-finals, forever rivals England and France will face each other later on Saturday. Croatia and Argentina have already reached the semi-finals. In cricket, India won the third one-day international against Bangladesh by 227 runs. Chasing a massive target of 410, the hosts could only post 182 runs in 34 overs. Earlier put into bat first, India posted 409 for 8 in stipulated 50 overs. For the visitors, Ishan Kishan made valuable contribution by scoring 210 runs, while Virat Kohli made 113 runs. Bangladesh has already won the three-match series.
Now, let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes, US troops are back in Somalia and scrambling to help its social forces. The Financial Times reports that Blackstone may slow the launch of private equity fund after investor withdrawals. The New York Times writes, China's looming tsunami of COVID cases will test its hospitals. Wall Street Journal writes, Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai gets another jail term after fraud conviction. Japan Times opines, Japan to include counter-strike capability in key security documents. The Guardian writes that activists appeal for rescue of Rohingya refugees stranded at sea in Laking boat.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserts, country's G20 presidency belongs to the entire nation and is a unique opportunity to showcase its strengths. Human Rights Day observed on Saturday. India's President Draupadi Murmu says, developing sensitivity and sympathy key to promoting human rights. New Delhi abstains from voting on UNSC resolution on exempting humanitarian aid from sanctions. India's largest business jet terminal commissioned at Cochin International Airport. In FIFA World Cup at Qatar, Morocco enters semi-finals, defeating Portugal 1-0. England to face France in remaining last 8 match later on Saturday. And in cricket, India wins third one-day international against Bangladesh by 227 runs at Chittagong. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Iraq. And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.